Welcome to the Own It Powercast, the place to be when you get serious about making big changes and accelerating growth in your life and in your relationships. Finally create the life you've always wanted, living life on your own terms. Learn how to take your fear and turn it into powerful choices that will create sustained change. Now your host, Mary Baker.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Own It Powercast, the place to come to get what you need to move yourself forward. Hey, it's Mary Baker and welcome to episode 272, When Life Knocks You Down, How Setbacks Shape Our Self-Confidence. Well, welcome to a new month and a brand new year. Today we're going to be diving into a topic that I think hits close to home for so many of us. And that's how major setbacks like a bad breakup, losing a job, or facing rejection can really impact the way we see ourselves. Because I think these experiences can really leave scars on our self-confidence, but they don't have to define us. Together today, we're going to unpack why they hit so hard, and more importantly, how they can really shape our self-image and what we can do about that. So as you're listening today and you realize that you might need some help with all of this, because usually we do, make sure you hit the show notes and sign up for a power hour with me. I have a few openings left for January, but they're going quickly. If you want some help right away, I have a mini course ebook on healthy boundaries, which is really important for your self-confidence. A 3-part mini course on how you lost your voice, and then the Find Your Voice course, which has great online group coaching and one-on-one help from me. And that is an amazing experience. So I really encourage you to check that out. If you have any questions around any of the courses that I have or any of the work that you can do with me, message me and we can figure that out. Okay, so when life knocks you down, why do setbacks impact our self-confidence so much? Well, let me start with something I think a lot of you can relate to kind of illustrate this. A few years ago, my client went through a really tough breakup, and it wasn't just the end of the relationship that hurt. It was the way it made him question himself. He kept replaying every conversation, every decision, everything, wondering if he was the problem, if he wasn't enough. It felt like he lost not just a partner, but his sense of who he was. Now, a lot of times that can come from being in a very unhealthy relationship. We've talked about that on the show, and we will continue. In this situation, it was unhealthy for him, and it really undermined his sanity and sense of self. But another example is another client of mine was laid off from a job she loved. And she told me it felt like someone had pulled the rug out from underneath of her. I mean, it made her really start doubting her abilities, even though she was incredible at her work and was not young, had been doing this a long time. But she'd say things like, well, maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was, Mary, or what if I don't find another job like this? I think both of these experiences left my clients grappling with the same thing, a deep sense of rejection and self-doubt. And that's the thing about these kinds of setbacks. They have a way of sneaking into how we see ourselves, making us question our own worth. But here's what I've learned. These moments, as painful as they are, and they are painful, don't have to continue to define us. They can actually become an important turning point. So why do these experiences hit so hard? So let's look at breakups first. When a relationship ends, I don't think it's just the loss of a person. That's its own piece of grief, and it's very important. But I also think it can feel like the loss of identity, loss of our plans for the future, and possibly even our sense of worth. You know, one of the hardest parts of experiencing rejection, whether it's a breakup, a job, or someone saying no to us, is how quickly we turn that rejection inward. That's the key. So instead of seeing it as a situational event, we start to think, well, what's wrong with me? Or what did I do to deserve this? In relationships, especially rejection often taps into, I think, old insecurities that we might not even be realizing that we're still carrying. For instance, if you grew up feeling like you had to earn love, maybe by doing well, being perfect, avoiding conflict, being compliant, or constantly putting others' needs first, well, a breakup can really feel like some solid proof that you're not enough. You might find yourself replaying every argument or moment where things went wrong, often blaming yourself for not being more patient, maybe more attractive, maybe more something, fill in the blank. Now, this smacks of poor boundaries, as you can see, right? But it creates a cycle of self-blame, and it can become incredibly destructive because it reinforces the idea that your worth is tied to someone else's opinion of you. But what's really happening is that the breakup is acting like a mirror, and it's reflecting old, unresolved wounds from the past. Maybe it's a fear of abandonment you've carried since childhood. And remember, like we've talked about here before, you can be in the room with your family and still feel abandoned. Maybe it's a belief that love is conditional and that it's based on what you can give rather than who you are. Even if on the face of it, you would say, no way, I don't believe that, I know better. I'm not really talking about conscious beliefs here. A lot of this is subconscious and maybe even unconscious. What's really important to remember is that rejection is often about the other person's needs, their capacity, or their circumstances, not a reflection of your value. See that detachment work in that phrase? But breaking free from the cycle of self-blame really requires us to recognize all of those old insecurities and really commit to beginning to heal them and work on them. And you can't do that by yourself, by the way. You need support. You need a group. You need a coach. You need therapy. You need all of it. Because this work isn't easy. But I think it's the work that allows you to separate your identity from the pain of rejection and start seeing yourself as whole and worthy, regardless of someone else's choices. What about job loss? I mean, our jobs can often become a big part of our identity, especially if we worked long and hard on building that career, and maybe we find a lot of passion and purpose in it. But losing a job can really shake our confidence. It can make us question our value and stir up, of course, fears about the future. And then there's the financial pressures too, and what society says. I mean, society says we need to achieve, we need to be successful, we need to do important work. All of that compounds to create huge emotional strain. It's a big loss. It's an especially big loss, I think, for people who don't have other things to lean on in the meantime, like having kids and being there for them, having a solid partner relationship that they really enjoy, because they're putting all their eggs in that basket, so to speak. That's where their friendships were, and that's where they felt needed and valued and loved and cared about. And the rejection is really hard because maybe even just being turned down for a promotion or a creative project. Rejection has a way of making us feel less than, because it can really activate some of your deep-seated fears of not being good enough. And those come from a long time ago. I think every kid has experiences where they didn't feel welcome, they weren't picked for the team, they were treated poorly by another child or maybe parent. And so what happens is, when it happens today in adulthood, it just becomes confirmation of rejection or conditional love that happened back then. Like how we needed back then to either do or be or have in order to be good enough. So those are some examples of how the losses in and of themselves can be big, right? Losing a marriage, losing a job, having a big health thing happen, being rejected by a close friend or your family. Those are big in and of themselves, and they're even bigger when they play a big part in how we see ourselves. And that's not to say that we don't need people, and we don't need relationships, and we don't need structure. I think we do. The danger is when all of our identity comes from that. So let's get into the aftermath, like how these events really help shape your self-image. I want to get into the inner dialogue, like how we talk to ourselves. Because when we experience a big setback, like a breakup, lose their job, or just rejected in some way, I think it's almost like the volume on our inner critic gets turned all the way up. It can really start feeding us harsh negative thoughts like, I'm not lovable. I'll never be able to do this. I can't cut it. I blew it. And these thoughts feel really incredibly real in the moment. But deep down, they're not actually true. They're just stories we start telling ourselves based on the pain that we're feeling. I think deep down, it's our fear that we aren't lovable. It's our fear that we can't be accepted. It's our fear that we don't belong. And I also think this can kick in survival trauma-based fears where we're just trying to feel safe. Because think about it, biologically built in, if you don't feel like you belong and you're accepted and you're loved, you may not be okay. You may not survive. Now, these days, it's more about psychologically and emotionally. Those are big needs that need to be met, belongingness and acceptance and self-acceptance. So we need to belong somewhere along with belonging to ourselves. Here's the thing. If we let these thoughts linger, they can really become patterns of thinking. And we know that. The more we repeat them, the more they start to feel like facts rather than just really like fleeting reactions in the moment to a tough situation. Just like when you drop something really heavy on your toe, like it is excruciating in the moment. You may drop to your knees. It hurts so bad. And I did that this morning when I hit my knee, and it feels in the moment like, oh my gosh, the pain's never going to go away, but it does. It subsides. And then we go back to our day. But with this, we are creating stronger neural pathways in our brain, and we got to be really careful about that because our brains are really wired to notice and reinforce patterns. So every little thing that we do or don't do, every little thing that happens outside of us can really feel like supporting evidence, supporting those negative beliefs. Then you have the confirmation bias going and all that stuff. So, for example, if you're continuing to tell yourself that you're not lovable, guess what's going to happen? You might start avoiding relationships because you're afraid of being hurt again. You don't want to feel like that again. But then here's what happens. You start avoiding connections. You're going to feel lonelier, which reinforces the idea that maybe you really aren't lovable. So it becomes this awful self-fulfilling cycle, I think, where this distorted view of yourself just gets harder and harder to shake. And this happens because our inner critic just thrives on generalizations and absolutes. Like a single rejection becomes proof that you'll always fail. One breakup becomes a story about how no one will ever love you. But these distorted views aren't grounded in reality. They're grounded in fear. And over time, though, they can really shape how you see yourself and how you interact with the world. It's really going to limit your opportunities for growth, I think, for connection and for success. That's why breaking these patterns is really important. And it just starts with awareness. Like, I don't want you shaming yourself because you're having shaming thoughts about yourself, right? Like, that's what you don't want to do. When you notice these thoughts creeping in, I want you just to gently challenge them. Like, ask yourself, like, is this really true or is this just my fear talking? Because let's face it, we all have an inner critic. But we don't have to believe everything that it says. I mean, we can gather some helpful information, like maybe, let's say, in the relationship that ended or the job that ended, you realize there were some things you're not proud of. Okay, but I want you to like pull them out, extract them, and push away all the rest. Like only bring forward lessons that are useful, okay? And even if you did struggle, it doesn't mean you're not lovable and doesn't mean you're not wanted or not worth hiring again. Because over time, we got to reframe these thoughts. We got to focus on our strengths and our resilience and, things we need to work on. But we want a more accurate and compassionate view of ourselves. That's what matters, guys. Yes, we want to be honest. If you don't change things about yourself, your relationships will struggle. You will struggle to keep a good job. You will struggle to thrive. But those are aspects of yourself, not the whole self. And a lot of times, those are things you can work on and change. And we need to, because so much of this just creates so much shame and avoidance. It makes us pull away from others. It makes us avoid taking risks. we're externalizing our worth, right? Like if people are happy with us today, we're okay. If we didn't make a mistake or piss anyone off today, we're okay. If we didn't fail today, if we kept all the balls up in the air perfectly, if we didn't need anyone or anything today, if we stuffed all our truth down, we can be okay. These are very dangerous beliefs that are extremely common. Most people don't want to admit that they have them, but they have them. I want you to think today, what are yours? If you got gut level honest, again, this is not to beat yourself up, but just to notice. And remember, if you have these, someone gave them to you in the very beginning. Then you just worked on solidifying them. Because you really want to be careful, because when we tie our worth to external things like a relationship or a job, losing them can feel like losing ourselves. I work with people who have been doing this all their life, and they put their identity into their work, or they put themselves aside to be in a relationship, whether that's in a partner relationship or to take care of their kids or both. I help them find who they are outside of those things. And that is really important. I mean, I think our identity, like the structures we have in our life, they do help us get needs met, like we talked about a moment ago, like belonging and acceptance and purpose. And when they're fractured or taken away, it does take time to heal and rebuild. But we just want to make sure that we are responsible for our identity, that we don't put it out there for others to have the power over. So how do you start working on this? Well, first of all, again, if you need help, reach out. Reach out for one of the courses, reach out for some coaching. Even if you just did a couple of sessions to see where you are, that might be very helpful. But first, I just want you to acknowledge the loss. And this is really important. Start by grieving what was lost. Know and remind yourself that, yes, it's okay to feel hurt. It's okay, and it makes sense that you're disappointed and even angry and scared. Because here's the thing, avoiding these feelings only makes them linger, but it also makes you deny yourself, because I think grief is one of the best ways to honor your truth. And if you struggle with confidence, you probably weren't able to do that earlier in your life, and maybe not even today. Your truth, meaning your thoughts, your real feelings, your real experience on the inside, your shame and your fear. Maybe even some earned guilt from the past you've never forgiven yourself for. And or maybe some crazy unearned guilt that you need to set the record straight on too. So you start honoring some of those things. Of course I'm angry. Of course I'm pissed. Of course I'm scared. Of course I'm all of the above. Even better if you can find someone safe that you can share this with, so you can get that validation and that mirroring. And for someone to help give voice to what happened and what it's meant to you. And the deeper you go, the deeper you heal. Because the more you validate what your truth is, the more confident and more grounded you will become. It doesn't feel really good at first, which is why we avoid it. But there's nothing more validating than doing grief work. Now, footnote, if you have some trauma back there, you know I'm going to say, if you haven't addressed it yet, I encourage you to get some trauma counseling around that first. Don't try to do all this work by yourself. Not a good idea. So acknowledging your grief, and then you want to look at challenging those negative narratives. Now do this second, not first. Do the grief work first. You can't do anything until you honor what you feel. You're just going to feel too resistant and not ready to do anything else. But let's say you have already started doing that. Then you can say, I'm ready to challenge the narratives. So notice when you're internalizing the setback as a reflection of your self-worth. For example, instead of saying, I'm not lovable, try to reframe. Say, look, this relationship just wasn't right for me, and it's more complicated, right? There's more variables, which we know there were. These just aren't my people. That job served me well, but it's time to move on anyway. So getting perspective, getting honest with some stuff, like, truth be told, maybe you were ready for a change, but you were afraid to admit that. And you didn't ask for this layoff or being let go. And that's hard because then you don't have control. We like change that we're in charge of. but maybe it's a blessing in disguise. And then you want to do the just because this doesn't mean that. Just because I wasn't able to keep this job doesn't mean I'm not a valuable employee. Doesn't mean I'm not talented. Doesn't mean I can't make a great partner for someone else or a great friend. Okay, so just because this doesn't mean that. I want you to detach things about you from things about it or them. And then I want you to think about, what do I want and need? Like a lot of times this rejection focus is all about the other person. And then we're like, wait a minute, what about you? Were you happy in that job? Were your needs getting met in that relationship? Why or why not? Sometimes rejection's a gift because it also makes us look at, I wasn't really happy either. I was kind of lying to myself. Maybe I was 75% okay with that job, but I wasn't thriving. It couldn't meet my needs. And then what are my standards and why? And I want you to turn inwards more and figure out what's negotiable and what's not for you and why. You want to reconnect with your values. You want to reflect on what truly matters to you. Maybe it's creativity. Maybe it's kindness. Maybe it's being a badass and being resilient. And what would it look like to live those values? Guys, when I watch clients start to make that subtle but profound shift, and I saw it the other day in action, it was so cool, where they start where the client shifts from focusing out there to others to feel okay about themselves, to internally finding their why they want to do something or why they want to become better at something. I watch their entire essence begin to change. I don't know how else to describe that. I actually see, I think, more of their authentic self, and others around them see it too. Because when I work with relationships, the other person's sitting there and they'll say, yeah, something feels really different. And along with this, you want to start taking small but empowering steps. Confidence, I'm going to say, comes from action, but start small. Try something new. Set a tiny goal. Maybe take a class to rebuild your skills. I've talked a lot about this concept over this past year because I think it's really important. Every time you see yourself step out, you increase your confidence because you see yourself being able to try new things. And that is loaded with lots of stuff. It means you're willing to expand who you are. It means you believe in yourself enough to do that. It means you have some boundaries and enough self-love to try something new. It means that you're feeling more brave and you are less in fight or flight as well. And then I want you to really lean into your support. Like, try to surround yourself with people who remind you of your value. Because this is not the time to isolate. Oh no, not the time indeed. Like, make sure you're checking in weekly with folks. Maybe it's friends. Maybe it's a support group. Maybe it's a book club. Maybe you take a yoga class, you volunteer something, you go help a neighbor, you do pick up basketball, whatever it is that allows you to have interactions with healthier people who can let you grow and help you heal. And then sometimes a coach or a therapist can really provide you the tools and the insight and the support that you need. So again, if it's trauma or overwhelming grief, I want you to get some professional help around that. And even if you're doing that, a coach in a group or like one of the courses that I have can really help you as well. And then stepping back a little bit and getting more perspective. Not at first. I don't want you stepping over your grief and saying, oh, but it's fine because no silver linings first. Silver linings last is the way I always say it. So let's assume you've been doing some grief work and you're looking at your inner critic. Then you step back a little bit. You say, okay, but these experiences were very painful, but they also have given me an opportunity to grow and find new strength. And boy, if nothing else, they put a fire under my ass to have something to do something or maybe be something better, right? So there is the gift that's inside of that. So just remember, your worth is not defined by someone else's opinion, by your job title, or a single moment or a few moments of rejection. Your worth is inherent in who you are. And a lot of times what happened in those circumstances happens with unhealthy people, unhealthy bosses, unhealthy partners, unhealthy family growing up. And it's also why getting back in touch or getting in touch for the first time with what matters most to you, what your values are, care about, are so important, because as long as you know who you really are at the core and who you want to be and who you're becoming and why, I think you're always going to have a guiding force. I think it's going to strengthen your integrity and you're going to have a stronger sense of self, a self that you can hold on to no matter what happens to you or around you. Setbacks are inevitable. We're going to have them, but they don't have to define your story unless you want them to. You can work on grieving, reframing, and taking small steps forward and honoring yourself, not just stepping over the feelings, but sitting in it for a little bit, not gaslighting yourself out of your reality, but acknowledging it first. It's going to help you actually become more stronger and more resilient. So today in this episode, we explored why these moments hit so hard and some of the impact that they can have on our confidence and our self-worth. Whether it's that sting of rejection or the echo of old insecurities, these experiences can really shape our inner dialogue and they can really influence how we show up in the world, but they don't have to. We talked about shifting the narrative, working on rebuilding our self-confidence, and getting perspective. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope this episode helped you honor how life may have thrown you around a little bit, but that honoring your reality, how that felt and how that feels really matters, and that you can become stronger for it and better because of it. Remember to check the show notes if you want to do any more learning or grab support. Join us on Wednesday nights. In our Facebook group, we have live sessions. We're there to talk about this kind of stuff and support one another and learning from each other ways to feel stronger and to keep growing. All right, so pay it forward, keep focusing on you, and I'll see you next time.
We hope you took away some useful insights and tools you can begin using right away. If you did, please leave a positive review and share on your social media. Because could you imagine if everyone in your life really got it together? Remember, own it now, so you can really own it later.